Hello, everybody. Thank you very much once again for joining us in our next African composers interview. We have a guest composer, a Namibian composer today, who is joining us from Canada. Before we speak to our guest composer, I would like to thank you for your support. To anyone who will join us live or to anyone who will watch this later as a recorded interview, thank you very much. Thank you to our guest composer of today as well. Thanks for taking out of your time. And now we're going to go right into the interview. First of all, to our guest composer, how are you doing?
I'm
Especially
doing good.
you're doing okay.
Yeah. I'm doing
Okay,
good. Thanks
brilliant.
for having me. Thanks. I'm so happy to be here. Yeah.
Brilliant. Good. So the first topic we'd like to cover is finding out more about our guests. So tell us about yourself, please.
Okay. So yeah, I am originally from Namibia. I grew up in Namibia, and I was part of a choir called Mascato Youth Choir, and I sang in the choir for maybe I think around 10 years. I sang in the choir. And while I was in the choir, I started working with other choir members to write music, and that's how I got, I guess, into the music industry a little bit. And so that choir also eventually sang some of the music that we wrote as well. And that choir toured internationally. So we did international tours every year or every other year, and I got to travel around the world a little bit. So we did especially Europe tours, and then we traveled to Canada in 2008, I think. That's when we traveled to Canada, and then I ended up moving to Canada shortly after that. So so yeah, I've been living in Canada now for almost 12 years. I've lived in Canada, and I now make a living, I guess, doing, you can call it music. Making music is my work, is my job. You can, like, if I have to describe it, I would say, I'm a performer, and I also write a lot of music, but I perform music in schools. So what I focus on is music for children. Um, and Canada is a very uh, we call it multicultural sort of place. So there's a real push here for any kind of diversity in terms of whether it's art or things like that, arts and culture with their festivals and everything. But I found a really good, I guess, opportunity in working for schools because music here is part of the curriculum for elementary, so primary schools or elementary schools as we call them here. So kindergarten to grade 6, if you're in that age group, you get music as part of your daily lessons at school. So because of that, in my province, because of that, there's a real need for music programs, especially for schools. So yeah, that being said, that's what I do. That's my job. I have two children as well, and I taught them some music first, music from the choir, um, my own, compositions. I taught my children first, and then from there, I decided to do the same for other schools as well. So that's, in a nutshell, that's who I am. That's what I do. I hope that kind of covers everything. But if I
Uh,
miss anything, just ask.
okay. Can you remind us of the decision or how you made the decision or why you decided to relocate to Canada? You talked about touring with the Moscato Youth Choir, touring
Yeah.
in different countries.
Mhm.
Sounds like that was a brilliant, I guess, career that was budding already.
You know what? That's true. I actually thought, according to to what I knew back then, I didn't actually want to move to Canada. But on one of the tours, I actually met what uh, what was to be my future wife. So she's here, she's Canadian and she lives here. We live here, and so I actually tried to convince her to move to Namibia because the place where I lived in Namibia is actually it's really nice. It's by the coast. It's got great weather and everything all year, and it's just a wonderful place called Swakopmund, which is where I'm from. And I tried to convince her to move there, but the reason why um, we decided that I should move here is because I was at that point already living on my own with in my own home, and I guess so. I had distanced myself a little bit from my parents, right? So I was about 20, I guess 26, and I had a career actually back then in banking, and I had already bought a house, and I just felt more independent. So I thought the transition to Canada would be easier for me than for my wife, who has a very close family relationship. So her and her sisters and parents, they're very close. So we thought it would be easier for me to move here than for her to move there. So in the end, that is why I decided to move. It was mainly for personal reasons, not for. At the time, I didn't think it was for professional reasons at all.
Okay, okay. Just to let the audience know that there is a documentary about you titled Memoirs of the Motherland, and part of this history is discussed in the documentary as well.
Yes, that is true. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so there's a small documentary. It's memoir.
Sorry.
You can watch it. It does show footage even from long ago when I was singing with the choir and when I moved here. It's pretty thorough. It's about 20 minutes. It's called Memoirs. Yeah, Memoirs of the Motherland. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. You just talked about working in a bank or banking. It's
Yes.
quite different from music. What happened when you got to Canada? Did you, again, this is discussed in the documentary, but tell us, you got to Canada, did you think I shouldn't work in a bank? I don't want to do that anymore. What happened?
It was pure coincidence that because I had a career in banking because in Namibia I did music as a very serious hobby, and I say that to a lot of new upcoming musicians now that you can have another job and you do music seriously and just enjoy it. So I used to do music, I would say, on the weekends and with a choir. So I usually had to take time off work to even tour with the choir. It was very difficult that in itself. But what happened was when I got on the airplane and flew, like you won't believe this coincidence, but when I when I was on the plane flying in 2008, that was when they announced the stock market crash. Yes, it was I believe it was the housing bubble is what it was in the US, which I guess severely impacted the financial industry in North America, which meant the what we would have considered to be the boom or like the really strong economy, especially in Canada. Canada is highly influenced by the U.S. So that I guess by the time I got here, especially, there weren't as many jobs in the financial industry, and even in general, like there just weren't any jobs in anything. In my province, it's an oil industry. So even there just weren't as many jobs as before. So I did go in for some interviews to the bank,
Okay.
and they did offer me some jobs. But because I was coming as an African, I had to like start over. And I'd already had so many years of experience, but they didn't count that experience. So they were going to pay me pretty much, you can say, like complete minimum wage to start from scratch. So that's why I decided to look outside of banking and see if maybe I can do something else. And
Okay.
so I just started performing music. So just like like a concert or something. And even from that, I started seeing the potential, because the audiences here seemed like they really liked African music. There were some groups traveling here and performing, so I used to open shows. Is it Oliver Mtukudzi from Zimbabwe at the time was
Okay.
used to travel here and do shows, and I used to open for shows for them and that sort of thing. So that's how I got started, and I saw the potential there. That it was possible. And as a banker, I was able to even crunch the numbers to see like, is there a potential career in music here? I did the same thing in Namibia. I crunched the numbers, and it wasn't possible. It was going to be very difficult to make a full-time career from music in Namibia. But it was possible, but it would have taken much longer. And in Canada, it was within reach, and it did take me about 10 years to become a full-time musician here. It took some time. So yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. But well done. Obviously, you've gained a bit of success, as a musician. We're going to talk about that later
Mhm.
on in the interview. But in your documentary, The Memoirs of the Motherland, you talk about being invited to take part in a children's festival.
Yeah.
It appears that was pivotal for you. It was almost like a takeoff point or a launch pad of sorts.
Yes. So at the time, I was used to, as musicians, we sort of put ourselves out there. We promote ourselves, right? So as a newcomer to Canada, I was trying to find where can I perform. Where can I go? So I would send emails to festivals and these sorts of things, and I did I did get quite a few shows, and I was playing some shows, and it was good, and I had a really good audience. And from that, suddenly I got an email from a children's festival, and the children's festival asked me to play 10 shows, and I didn't even understand like how can I play 10 shows at a festival? What's going on here? How does it work? And they explained to me the festival runs from Monday to Saturday. And at the festival, there's children that sort of come through, with their teachers, and they come and attend the festival. So the schools basically send their children to this festival, and this was new. I didn't even know about it. So I did that festival, and I guess the turning point for me was the response when I played that show. The kids loved it. The teachers, after each show, the teachers came and talked to me and said, where are you from? Would you consider coming to my school, and would you do a show at my school? So that's when I guess I realized that there's something to it, and so I went on a completely different journey again to develop myself to be able to work in schools, because as I said, music's part of the curriculum. So at the time, I couldn't read or write music very well. So I went to school first to learn to read and write better. So I went and studied, I guess they have a popular music and jazz music program here. So I went and did that for 1 year, and then I went to another university and studied music for children specifically, so that I understand what is the vocal range of children. So when I am if I want children to sing with me, what is the vocal range they can sing in, and I wanted to learn all those things. So I studied that it took me maybe 2 or 3 years to study, and when I was, I felt satisfied with everything I knew, then I started working in schools and marketing myself directly to schools, and then it was the gamble paid off. So coming out of that, I was fully booked for the first year in schools performing. So it was the right decision, I guess. I was fully booked, and it was all going fabulous, I guess. Only the recent, I guess, COVID-19 situation with the shutdown of schools, that was the first time I kind of slowed down
Okay.
as well. But everything that was canceled now in the last few months has now been rescheduled to next year. So I mean, it just just keeps going. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So, making sure that you try and stay active in the spaces that you are interested in clearly worked for you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's possibly no way that you could have been invited to take part in that festival if you had just stayed dormant and, hoping for the best for something to happen.
Yeah, you really you can't do that. I mean, I even in Namibia, I should mention that I was I achieved certain, I don't know, in terms of success, like you can define success however you want, but for the work I've done in Namibia, I always put myself out there. And in Namibia, our music was getting onto MTV, which was a goal of ours at the time. So even then, I always made a point to try to put myself out there, and it doesn't always go well, but the right people eventually get to see you, right? The people that like what you do. So if I didn't put myself out there, I don't think the schools or the teachers would have been able to find me, or the festival, right? They were able to find me because I was out there actively doing. So I spend a lot of my time on that side of what I do. I would say a third of my work is specifically dedicated to putting myself out there and letting people know what I'm doing as well.
Okay. Okay. So you work a lot with children.
Yeah.
How do you manage that? Do you face any challenges working with children, just generally?
Um, yeah, I listened to an interview of a few, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it was an interview that was done by the CBC, so Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. They were talking to somebody from Disney, and at the time I was actively working with children, and there were many challenges, but this interview really, I guess, helped me. And what they were talking about was that Disney, with their new animated films, if you think of films like The Lion King, those kinds of movies, what they do is they basically don't treat any of the music or any of the messages as if it's for children. They do address very mature topics. So if you look at like things like The Lion King, there's death, there's betrayal, there's all of these things. And I guess the person who was being interviewed was from Disney, and they said that you shouldn't think of it as I'm working with children. This movie is for children. You should just sort of make it as it's for anybody, and then your hope should be that the children can grow into those mature themes. So that's how I approached my career. So some of my biggest fans in here in Canada are end up being the parents of the children, because if they come to a show, it's just music. I don't really think of it too much as music for children at all. But the challenges, of course, is being able to talk to 30 students at a time, talking to them and managing them. But the good news, I guess, is that the teachers really help me a lot. So my job isn't really to manage the children, but with children, it's like they're not adults. So if you sitting and talking to a group of adults, you at least expect them to sit and listen and to pay attention. But when it comes to children, you have to be what I would call animated all the time. So you can't, and you have to have very interesting things to say all the time. You can't just explain some very difficult concepts and go. You can't go on and on about something. You have to be very active in keeping them engaged. You have to earn it. So I think that's the biggest challenge. Sometimes I in the past, before the COVID-19 restrictions, I used to work with 300 children at a time when it's right before a show. So I would have to take a microphone and talk to 300 kids, and those kids, you have to say something in a way that gets their attention. So I had to learn all sorts of tricks and things to be able to get their attention, and strategies like to play the drum to get them to echo, and all of these management styles and things. But the good thing is that there's lots of teachers who I asked for tips, and they gave me lots of good tips on what I can do, for classroom management, so to speak. Yeah.
Okay. All right. You talked about channeling your work, not necessarily directly at children, but at a broader range of age groups. I just thought of Cuckoo. I don't know if you remember Cuckoo, your song. There's a video
Yes.
kind of your children singing Cuckoo. Can you
Yeah.
talk just briefly about that before we move on? Because I was wondering, was that channeled towards the parents, the children? I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I can tell you a little bit about my creative process, right, and then
Okay.
how it works.
Please do.
Why I wanted this as a career in music is I'm somebody who gets lots of ideas, and what I didn't like is when I was working in, say, in the bank, or I had other jobs too here in Canada. What I didn't like was if I suddenly have an idea and I'm not able to act on that idea right away. So if I get an idea right now, that's why I wanted to be a full-time musician, so that if I get an idea right now, I have the ability to quit everything else I'm doing and go and work on that idea. And so Cuckoo is an example of that. I had the idea. It came from another song, which was a chicken song performed by my old choir. So it's just a song about a chicken, and they were using different words in another language, not in Swahili. So they were using other words to make a sound of a chicken, and I think it sounded like kiwi kiwi kiwi, something like that. And so and it gave me a great idea to do something. It inspired me. I would say, and then I switched it. I took the word at Swahili, which is kuku, which is the word for a chicken, and then I thought to myself, when I think of chicken, what are some good ideas I can think with tying music to a chicken? It's a little bit tricky, because I was actually joking, because my wife is a teacher as well, and I was talking to her, and I was joking with her, and I said, should I make the song about like eating the chickens? And my wife my wife said, no, you can't. Nobody's going to want to listen to that. And so I say, well, what else is there? And then I got the idea of like a rooster on a farm waking you up. That came to mind. And
Okay.
so I wrote the whole thing as a wake up song. So I went and wrote English lyrics that is accessible for anybody. And Cuckoo is one of my more like successful recent videos that I did when I was in when the school shut down. I made small interactive videos at home with my children for other families, right? So it's one of my most successful ones because it addresses the thing of getting yourself motivated in the morning. So I made it as a little workout. But you see, it was an idea that if I didn't have the time to spend thinking and brainstorming immediately, then I might have lost the train of thought, right, to be able to do it. So it's one of the reasons that I wanted to be a full-time musician, is so that I can use this creative process more often, like this, the way that I function, I guess, as a musician. Yeah. I hope I answered your question, but but that's how the song came out, the Cuckoo song.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I
So
watched it.
did you enjoy it? Is that it? Did you feel like it was accessible for parents too? Is that why you're saying that?
Yes, yes. I
Okay.
just wasn't sure who you targeted that particular video at. It was quite interesting, and I thought that's a good one for a workout in the morning as a
Yes.
family, for a whole family, or even as an individual. It would work out as well.
Absolutely, and I did it mostly for myself, 50%, because I was starting with the my schedule had changed. I used to have to go to a school in the mornings, right? So I have to be there 8:30. So I had that extra accountability of having to be somewhere, but that changed with the COVID-19 situation. The whole family was working from home. Everybody was here, and we didn't have to be anywhere at 8:30, but we still had to convince ourselves to wake up, brush teeth, and get going. We still had to do something. So I did it partly for myself too. I, I did it kind of for myself. So that's why the words, they're mostly inspiring myself to wake up and do something.
Yeah.
Get
Yeah.
going. Yeah.
Okay. You talked about the fact that you work in African music. Any video that we watch where you are being interviewed, you talk about African music.
Yes.
What is African music?
Oh, here we go. Yeah. So Uh, I think the reason why I don't say like Namibian music, or why I don't say Herero music or Damara music is actually because I grew up in the apartheid era of South Africa, and Namibia was under the apartheid regime, right? And so my parents, they didn't actually teach me any of the cultural traditions of the ethnic group, I guess, that I came from, the group of
Mhm.
people. So those are the Herero people. So technically, I'm supposed to be able to speak Herero, the language. I'm supposed to be able to understand the cultures and traditions. But my father thought, and he was right in a sense, that many of the opportunities were going to be outside of that culture because of the way that the country was at the time. Now, I have to say, Namibia is a lot better now. Um, to a certain extent, Namibia is a lot better at recognizing cultural groups because we're no longer under the apartheid system. But the Herero people are still a very small minority in the country, and they don't even really get a fair representation with their music and things on the radios or anything like that. It's not the same. The majority of people are Oshivambu, so that music is more popular, right? So basically, I didn't really get to do any African, like really African music until I joined the choir. That's when I learned African music, and the choir sang music from all over Africa. So we sang, music from all over Africa, and that is why when I decided that I was going to do this, I decided that I was going to draw from many different, as an artist, I was going to draw from many different African groups. So if I see a song from South Africa, one of the recent ones I did was the Bicycle Song, and that is a song that our choir sang. If I see a song and it makes sense, and I think it will be a good fit in the schools or for children, or my audiences would like it, then if it's part of the public domain, which is what I check first, then I would just go ahead and use that song in my workshops as well. I first try to find the composer and then try to contact the body. So it would be like the Samro is what they're called in South Africa,
Yeah.
and then the rights organization, and then see if there's a living composer. And yeah, and so that's why I guess it's so broad for me, is that I don't actually have, like, I can't speak any African language. So I will sing in all of the different languages. If you tell me a song from your country that you think would be a good fit for the audiences, I will do it. Here in Edmonton, when I first got here and I did all those shows, they didn't actually have um, so many African bands here. So the Nigerian Association of Edmonton
Okay.
invited me to perform at their shows, and then another week it would be the Zimbabwe Association, and then it would be, it was just everybody would ask me to do it, and then sometimes they would ask me, hey, can you do a song from Zimbabwe, or can you do a song from here? And then I would say, okay, I'll try to do it, and so on. So I guess my experience in the choir helped me to be sensitive to the pronunciation of the languages as well. And so I've been able to, I guess, do them properly. And then I always check with somebody from the country if I'm pronouncing the words correctly and stuff like that. And that's why, I mean, I know it's not the best thing to call it African music. And I know that Africa is diverse, but I just try to make it easier for my audiences to understand that I'm not only doing music from Namibia, and even in Namibia, you can't even say Namibian music. Within Namibia, there's so many different groups, so it just gets very difficult. So, yeah, I guess that's why I call it African music. Yeah.
Okay. We will talk about pronunciation. What you just talked about pronunciation
Yeah.
briefly. So there is a text from someone's post that I would like to read
Sure.
shortly. Let's finish with this question first of all.
Hmm.
So what is your goal of teaching what you call African music and styles? From watching the documentary, I
Hmm.
believe it seems to have come because you went to Canada, couldn't find, or almost like you were missing home. Let's just put it that way. And then you
Yes.
decided, oh, what's the best way of bringing home to where I am now?
Yeah.
And that came about in a way as part of the story. Is that what is the goal? You could have said, I'll learn some Canadian nursery rhymes and teach these. I can do anything. you
Oh
know.
gosh, I don't want to. I don't want to. Oh, I don't want to tease the Canadians, but I'm going to do it now. If
Okay.
if if you, oh gosh, the Canadians are going to watch this. Um, if I've done a lot of let's say nursery rhymes, right? Like take North American nursery rhymes. Let's take it Western nursery rhymes as a whole and children's songs. And to a certain extent, I just didn't enjoy them. So when I had my own children and I started wanting to teach them some music, I just I don't know. I felt that the songs were like you couldn't listen to them for very long. You know,
But you
um,
grew up with them, did you not? Because quite a few Africans grew up with non-African. Sorry, go on.
you're right. You're definitely right. But
Okay.
let's say if I take like my brother's children are the same. My brother lives in Namibia.
Mhm.
His children are the same age as my children, and I can tell you that they couldn't listen to that kind of music for a long time. If you know what I'm saying, because it's very simple, right? The melody is very simple. It's almost like I said, it's simplified because it's for children, right? Now with African music, what's nice about it is the melody can be simple, but the rhythmic component is exciting. The rhythmic component of it, and it at least makes you want to dance and move. And I think that is the thing that I missed. Here, people stand still. People stand still. They'll sing even an exciting African piece, and they'll stand still, and the piece just doesn't work if you stand still. Like it doesn't work. So that movement and excitement that comes with the music, that's what I missed. Being excited with music, and I think that's what I picked up when I sang in the choir. Whenever we did any song, really, we were moving. Even when we sang classical pieces, we were moving. Our body was moving to sort of help us to bring that message across. So we expressed more. And in Canada, I'm not sure. Like I felt the European audiences too were more reserved when they sang, and so the expression wasn't the same. And I guess I missed that excitement, and so that's what I wanted to reproduce here in Canada through the music. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, you mentioned that in one of your interviews, I think, about dance.
Yes.
I have a line here about you incorporating dance movements. So you are actually right. I have observed that in a number of choirs, when you watch the choirs, there's usually no movement. There's a lot of standing still, no matter how exciting the music gets. So I guess
Mhm.
missing dance from back home, where you come from, might have moved you, as you said, into
Yeah.
trying to introduce that. And there is a lot of dancing to anybody who is watching or who will watch later. Google our guest composer of today. You will observe and you will notice that there's quite a lot of dancing in his performances when he works with children or when he works with even with adult groups. Um, Good. So I'm going to move on now to
Mhm.
quickly read the text I was talking about,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about Africa and the oral tradition and the pronunciation. So this centers around the oral nature of the transfer of information
Okay.
around and across Africa. So let me get the text. So a few days ago, Google created a doodle. You know about Google's doodles in different parts of the world, where they
Yes.
change the signs on the home pages of Google on a
Hmm.
daily basis. So a few days ago, they had the Mbira as the doodle.
Yes.
I tried to find out if it was an international one or if it was just for a particular country. It seemed that that was the international doodle for the day, so that meant it was quite significant.
Oh, okay.
Um,
That's
so
nice.
I took screenshots that night, shared them on the African Composers page. So this is
Hmm.
good. Let's share it. I didn't do much research because it was in the middle of the night when I noticed it. Then I noticed in the morning posts, people were posting all over the internet about it,
Hmm.
mostly celebratory, oh, the Imbira, 1,000 years celebrating the Imbira. But there's this post I saw online of a lady who performs on the Imbira. If you look at it's quite a lengthy post, I will just read a few lines. She
Okay.
talked about the fact that people were contacting her because she's known as someone who performs on the instrument. And she posted
Yes.
something online. It's not a very happy post.
Okay.
And yes,
I'd love to hear it. Yeah.
talking about yeah, her history, how her family from generations ago were condemned for certain things that they do, including
Okay.
religious practices, worship, prayers, services, and playing certain instruments and all of that.
Yes.
Talked about how that was part of what the what colonization was about.
Yes,
Part
I'm
of
aware about the
missionary.
Imbira and that process. That the Imbira is making a comeback now, right? It's
Yes.
coming back. So yeah. So I
I, don't, I,
agree
didn't,
with
I
that.
didn't even know it was a comeback. I just thought it was there. But looking at her post,
Yeah.
I mean, there's quite a lot contained in that post.
Yes.
When we talked about pronunciation, let me go to. She talked about when she was studying as a child, how she was condemned for something she said
Hmm.
around her culture. She also talked about gaining admission into Princeton, and this happened when she was studying, I believe, in the USA. So I will just read this very
Sure.
quickly. So there was a lecture where every translation from the Shona language was wrong. She's talking about a lecturer when she was studying.
Okay.
Then I voiced these errors, and this lecturer said, your language and knowledge were passed down orally. No one really knows anything, not even you. She goes
Oh,
on to say, this lecturer destabilized any ownership or authorship of my Mbira epistemology in the same way colonizers and missionaries had my ancestors 120 years prior.
yeah.
Brings us to the topic of the oral nature of the transfer of our information. That
Yeah.
someone can tell you it
Yeah.
was orally passed down, nobody really knows, not
Yeah.
even you.
Okay. Well, it is sad, that sad, and I'm assuming based on what you said that this happened a while ago now, right? This wasn't very recent that the incident happened, right?
Yes, probably a few years ago. I didn't check the
Yeah,
date. You cannot
you
see
can
unless.
double check, but what I can say is that that kind of that kind of talk. I mean, it's not accepted now. I think that especially North American universities are becoming a lot better at that. But when I first came to Canada, I remember one of the first times I worked in a school, I saw a young boy come up to me, and his teacher was talking to me. And the young boy came and tried to tell me where he's where his family is from in Africa.
Oh, okay.
And it was Tanzania. And that's how he pronounced it. And then the teacher said to the boy, "It's
Tanzania.
it's Tanzania."
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that um, a few years ago, like I would venture to say 8 years ago, and today things have changed. I've seen a real shift in the way that universities and educators are now approaching these sort of things that that were that were acceptable even like 10 years ago, 8 years ago. They're not acceptable anymore. There has been a lot of improvement in the last few years. So I mean, yes, I mean, I've had similar challenges as well, um, but I think that we have a lot more Africans who are actually able to get access to social media and able to challenge things like when we're talking about the Imbira, for example, you know, there's quite a few people who do have that knowledge. And before social media, those people weren't able to go online and write if they had a complaint, and write about it. But we have more access. So I think that as a global society, we have more accountability now
Okay.
for
I think.
anything. You can't just
Okay.
come and, say something like these, professors might have been able to do before. They can't do that anymore. It
And
won't work. Mhm.
yes, it's a very different state of play now in a different world. I'm
Yeah.
looking at it actually from a very different angle. I'm looking at the potential accuracy of what the teacher said, the lecturer said, rather than what he said. So
Okay.
rather than the changing landscape and challenging how
Yeah.
people speak, I'm looking more at it from. So let me just put some background on this. This
Yeah.
platform or this interview is part of one of the reasons why I do these interviews is because I am trying to ensure that we record Africa's history accurately, the
Yes.
history of our composer.
Mhm.
So that lecturer said that I'm trying to tie it to what we are doing right now live. Is there some
Yeah.
accuracy? I'm not supporting what he said or how he said it, but our
But
the oral
I hear
difference.
what you what
You
you're
mentioned.
saying. It's difficult. So an example that I have from what you're saying and where I agree with you that it is, it's very challenging with the oral traditions is our choir had been singing a South African song for many years. Okay, we sang it for many years, and it's quite a well-known song. But now I wanted to translate the song so that children can sing it in North America. So I had to write the words down, like the lyrics. I had to write them down. As soon as I wrote them down, I contacted somebody who speaks Zulu, which is the language, and they immediately told me those words are incorrect. They're not the right words. In fact, those words, what you're saying, they don't even make any sense.
Oh,
And a lot of times, I was in the choir for many years. We sometimes sacrifice that accuracy for just that joy, that experience of the joy of the music. And it happens a lot. So I have seen it, and then that song gets passed on incorrectly to another choir, and to another choir, and to another choir. So part of what I am doing is trying to, especially if I have to translate it to be sung by children who are not African, I want to make sure they're singing the right thing as well, to be respectful, right, of that culture and that group. And it gets very complicated because when we took that particular song, the bicycle song, right, we ran into some serious challenges when we figured out. I contacted two people who spoke the language, and we had to sit down, and even for them, they had a hard time deciding what is the song saying, why does the song sound this way. And in the end, we found out that the song, because it was written a few years, like many years ago, let's say in the 40s or 50s or 60s, it was talking about a place that existed then, but that place doesn't exist anymore. So those are the those are the challenges. So that place has a different name now.
Yeah. Or there's a road that goes through it now, or there's
Yes,
I've seen that before.
exactly. So to a certain extent, so what my message is, right, is it's not enough to just be very accurate with a music piece. It's you have to focus on the context of the piece and where does it come from. So for me currently, I feel like that's the only area where Western education can improve, because they like to take the Mbira and celebrate the Mbira, but maybe not so much the cultural context and those things. So a good example is the djembe drum, right? It's everywhere in North American classrooms and all of that sort of thing, but you will get many clinicians that don't acknowledge the culture of where it comes from and everything, and they don't acknowledge the practices of those people where the drum comes from. And because of that, I think that's still a challenge that we're all facing, like especially here where I am in Canada, where we need to do better at that. Like that's something we have to improve. And whenever we approach any piece of music, is to not just want it for the sake of the music, but to really understand a music piece. You have to, especially an African piece, you have to understand the context of the piece and the people. You have to sometimes even know a little bit about the people, like why are they singing about this? Like, why is it a big deal? And sometimes then you immediately have to learn the history, because if you don't know the history, then the song doesn't really make sense, right? So that's an area that we can still improve on, I'm sure. Yeah.
So there are two people who are responsible, I suppose. So the responsibility is spread.
Mm-hmm.
The person who wants to use the music should ask questions. From where I sit, the person also who is producing the music should make sure it's accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Because my concern as well, like I said before, is about these things not being written down. And I saw this when I was growing up. I sang in different choirs. Someone will bring a sheet of music handwritten by the composer, okay, with solfa notations. By the time the person next to you has copied the solfa notations, they made a mistake. Part of the thing has changed. So it's in soprano, alto, tenor, bass, several pages. That person takes it to the next choir. somebody else makes a photocopy, it's not a very clear photocopy, is then photocopied again somewhere else. The song is changing as it's traveling. So the recording, the onus is on the person creating as well as the person who wants to use it to ask the questions you said about the history, the background, the context. But
Mhm.
are we actually are we cognizant of the fact that we are not writing enough? We are not recording enough. Just something as simple as going to your hometown, village, city, whatever, and recording the voices, the music of the people who we still have alive with us today,
Mhm.
grandparents, grandparents, making sure that we get the original tunes from them so that
Mhm.
we record this history accurately. I think we've highlighted that there is a two-sided thing. If
Yeah.
somebody outside Africa wants to use the music, ask questions. But
Mhm.
if they ask and there is no record, what do? Do they just
What
walk
can they do? You're
by?
right. And I have run into that situation many times that some of the educators who do a song, they can't even trace that song. Where does that song come from? And they're trying. They do try, and they try very hard. Especially, I would say Canadian educators I can speak for because they're the people I work with the most. They try to find every day, and sometimes they're even trying to find music from a certain place, but they can't even find it, like,
Let's do
so
that.
they have a hard time as well. So I agree that
Okay.
it's two-sided, both
Okay.
our responsibility and theirs. Yeah.
So let's move on to the next question then, because that what we just talked about takes us nicely to the next question. And I would really appreciate your ideas, your suggestions at this point, because we had a brief conversation a few days ago
Mhm.
around ideas, suggestions for African composers. And I think what we just talked about now, the gap in resources, gap in information,
Yeah.
linking to the world outside of Africa or even within Africa for creators, for choir directors, teachers. So at this point, please tell us, if you have your ideas for African composers who are actively composing today, for
Okay.
identifying opportunities, creating opportunities, growing their opportunities, helping themselves, anything
Yeah.
and everything.
Okay. So I mean, I've got lots of different tips and things that I always think about. I made a small list of these things, but I want to answer the question directly first. I think that every person making music or making any kind of art needs to have a system in place that enables people to find their music or find their art, and also to be able to support them somehow. You have to make the terms and conditions of what kind of support you want. So a really good goal to have as a composer or as a creator of content is, I would say, is to have a website, and the ability of the website should be to be able to even collect payments for whether it's your service, or whether to be if somebody wants to use your piece, it should be on there. And you don't have to be in a rush to get all of those kinds of things in place. But I say, if someone was to sit and plan for 2 to 3 years, I think anyone in the world would be able to put that together. And a lot of people nowadays, they're focused on getting a Facebook page up and running, um, maybe a YouTube channel, and there's this real sense of just being known, going viral and everything. Because I mentor like new musicians here in Canada as well, that are coming up, and there's this sense of, I want everybody to know who I am, but you need a better system in place so that it's not about just knowing who you are. I think it's more about, you know if I like your music, what do you want me to do? In my case, if you go to garthprince.com, I I have the terms and conditions for engaging with me on the website. Number one, I want people's email addresses. That's what I want. Why do I want that? Because if I do have an announcement about a new CD or something, then I can contact those people at that point. So my website is designed, for example, to collect email addresses. It's the number one thing. Just collect them. So if you go to the website, the first thing you'll see is on the main page, on the homepage, is just, yeah, email, just the email. And then further to that, um, it talks about my services. So if you're a composer, for example, you should have a tab that says, here are the services. Like, what do you want to do? I would say if you want to compose for movies, put it on the website, because you never know who is going to come on that website and find you and find that that's what they're looking for, or who they are going to know, and they're going to refer you to some other people. So you really have to be clear about what you want, and you have to decide. You don't have to put rates, like how much you charge. You don't have to put any of that on. But I think it's easier for people to find you online. I would say that there are people, looking for composers and looking for music right now, and sometimes we, as musicians, we always want to rely on somebody else to do this kind of work for us, to either create a website or to brainstorm ideas, right, for how we can be successful and that sort of thing. But I think that it's each of our responsibility, because we don't have a very good standardized system as Africans, where there is a central place to go to. It's not there yet. Because we're not there yet, and we can work towards that. I think it's a good goal to have, a central place where we can go online one day. But I think for now, because we're not there yet, within the next year or two, I would love to see more composers online. If I click on your profile on Facebook, I want to see your website, and I want to click on your website. I want to go to your website, and if I like your music, I want to know what can I do. Even if you have a donate button there, you'd be surprised. During the COVID-19, when I had the shutdown of schools, I designed the donate button, which is just saying, you know what, I'm not able to perform in schools right now. If you want to donate, if you like what I do and you want to donate. And I was surprised that people would go on there and they would just donate. And then I kept creating videos for free for people. And I said, if you like the videos, just donate. And you would really be surprised how many people around the world would do that. They would actually do that because they want to support upcoming and growing art in the world. They don't always want to support things that are already in the mainstream. They're looking for artists to support. So I think that it's possible for any artist to do something like that. Yeah. Yeah, so that's like my first. So that's like my first, I guess, tip, I would say, and that's something I would like to personally see. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. That was I guess a brilliant set of contributions to anybody who is going to watch this later. Very useful ideas, helpful ideas from our guest composer of today. Thank you very much, Garth. Before we finish, I would like to talk about your trip to your country. You said you had, in the documentary, you said you had not been back home for about 9 years, and then you went back. Mm-hmm. And during the voiceover in the documentary, you talked about the fact that you spoke to some children that you went to work with as part of your residencies and concerts. Mm-hmm. And you said that even though you had things you wanted to teach them, for the most part, they were the ones, these students. They were there to teach students abroad, which I think you mean students back home in Canada, yes, how to do what the children in Namibia that you were talking to were doing. You also talked about learning from the Moscato Youth Choir in Namibia when you went on a visit. Mm-hmm. That's really humble, by the way, because I observe how a lot of people want to go to Africa and teach and teach and teach. And I sometimes ask, are we aware as Africans that we have a lot to offer?
Yeah, I talked about that too in the documentary. I think close to the end, I said that because I grew up in the segregation era where it was a class system, apparently, white culture and white people were the most valued, and then brown people were in the middle, and then black people were at the bottom. So when I was growing up, it was almost like a message I was constantly getting, like as if as Africans we don't have value. So when I performed with the Moscato Choir in Europe the first time, right? Now I'd never done, I was probably 15 or 16. I'd never done an international tour before. I had always performed in Africa. Now you have to know, back then, this is a long time ago now. I'm 37 now, so I was about 15 back then. and we were transitioning out of the apartheid system, right? And so we had done a lot of performances in Namibia and South Africa, and it always seemed like they were looking down on African music, as if African music somehow was not, as important. It was not as esteemed. It was not valued. So I had the same attitude towards any kind of African music myself. And then I did my first trip abroad was to Spain, and we did our first show, on this trip, and we performed, and the way that the audience responded when we sang, we got standing ovation. We sold so many CDs, and the audiences stayed behind after the concert to talk to us individually. They wanted to talk to the choir members because we were young, right? 15, 16. And so I guess they wanted to get to know like these people that are performing this music. And then I saw, compared to if we were to sing Western music, or the response from the audiences was they wanted us to share our culture, and they valued it. And I think it really, I guess, started the journey for me. It started right there, because for the first time I saw, wow, what we have to offer is actually very valuable. These people, they paid money to come to this concert. They're buying CDs. They're asking us what are other ways that they can support the choir. They're asking those questions. So I knew, okay, that maybe the way that I grew up, the message I was getting might have been wrong, And so I went back to the drawing board on my own sort of path, and I started saying, it is valuable, And sometimes with Africa, people value mostly the resources of Africa, sometimes even the tourism and the animals and all of those things. But my old choir conductor always used to say that the real gold is the people. She used to say that, and I used to work with her, and she's unfortunately passed on now, but she used to tell me that. And I think it's one thing for someone to tell you something, but then for you to experience it yourself, right? So when we traveled abroad and we saw the response to our culture and our music and everything, then I knew that yes, and now I've been living in Canada for 12 years. I can tell you now, I'm making a full-time living teaching the cultures and traditions from the choir, right? And I can tell you now that yes, what we have to offer is very valuable. We just have to be better organized in how we offer this to the world, and we have to be better organized in stating the terms and conditions for what we are offering. So that is my big thing for composers, or for anyone composing music, is before you even talk to anybody about your music, you need to sit down and think for yourself, what is your goal with your art? What do you want personally out of it? Decide that first before you engage with other people. So for mine, my goal was that I wanted to do it as a full-time job, and that was my goal. So that is what I worked towards over the last 12 years, and it took 10 years to be able to do that. But at the same time, I think that yeah, we have a lot to offer, but it's just a matter of like how are we gonna offer that, and it has to be that regardless of whether you're African or not African, if you're an artist, it's up to you to decide the value of what you have. And sometimes we undervalue ourselves as artists. Artists like to do that. They'll say, I'll just do it for free. I'll come for free and I'll do that. And if you get into that habit of saying, I'm just going to do everything for free, if you get into that habit of doing that, then you might be stuck there for your career. Like you might always be doing it. You have to sit and say, if this was any other job that I was doing and I spent 30 hours to make this piece, right? How much would they pay for that? Per hour. If I was working at my other job, how much would they pay? And then you start thinking about the value of it. And also art is so amazing because it usually, if it's an original composition, it's something that didn't even exist before, and now it exists. So I'm just saying, it's actually so valuable, right? And it's so niche too because there isn't, so like if I try to go and find compositions right now, it's easy to find. I'll tell you now, it's easy to find the music of composers from all around the world, but it's hard to find African compositions. So I'm saying ours should actually be valued even more. It should be high. It should be a higher value because it's more rare. So that's all I think that we still have to work on. But otherwise, I think the music from Africa for me has always been the best music, and that's why that's the music I chose. And I've worked with many different genres, and I still enjoy doing it as well today.
Okay. Just to quickly mention, if anybody is interested in finding out more about African composers, we have compiled quite a list of over 300. Just the African Composers Facebook page for anybody who's going to watch this interview later. You can find out more about African composers and some of the African composers that we have identified. We've reached the 1 hour mark. In fact, we have passed it. But I just want to quickly mention that you do try to stay on top of things and stay current and refresh your knowledge and improve your skill rather than saying, well, I know what I know, I'm going to teach what I know. You try to add to your knowledge and continue to improve so that you bring fresh material and you stay, make sure that it's accurate as well. Can be challenging to do, but you do what you can, which is part of why you went to visit as well, to learn, as you said. Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Just to quickly add one last question. What did you learn from the Moscato Youth Choir? Because you said you learned something from them, or a few things. What did you learn on that trip, the Moscato Youth Choir? And then we round up the interview.
I actually sang in the choir myself for 10 years. Then I left, and then I went back. And what was very exciting for me was that the choir was still going. Because the years that I was in the choir was around the years that the choir started.
Sorry, we lost you for a few seconds. You said you went back, and then we lost you. You said what was very exciting, then we didn't catch the rest. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So it's just that the fact that the choir was still going when I returned, because the choir unfortunately lost the director, the original founder and director. So I guess one of the things that I did learn about the choir was, when you're creating something, you have to think about how can your art outlast you. And our director invested in people, So one of the choir members that grew up in the choir is now the director of the choir. So I think the big thing when I went back, I saw that if you spend a lot of time building something, you have to think about how can people access this if ever you're gone, right? And I think that's the trouble for us, is that sometimes we don't put in place structures while we're alive so that people can access our music. And so, especially because we have so many oral traditions, if someone passes away, their knowledge is gone, right? And so that choir, what I learned on that trip particularly was that they had found a way to think about, I guess, the long-term legacy of what the choir started and how to keep it going. So it got the wheels turning in my own mind for that. So I'm working on trying to record everything as much as I can. So if anything happens to me, then all of the information isn't just gone. Right, and that's why I make the YouTube videos and all of the things, because my hope is that if something does happen, then there's something there, a body of work that I have presented that people can still access.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for your time today, Garth.
Thanks for having me. Yeah,
thank you. Learned quite a lot, gained some insight into what you do, how you do what you do, and why you do what you do as well. It's been interesting going on that journey with you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your interest and your support, all the suggestions that you gave to African composers today during the interview. Thank you to anybody who will watch this interview later. Garth, we wish you success with your future endeavors, and we hope that you stay in touch, and we hope to keep in touch with you as well and follow on with your progress and anything you're going to do going forward.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Nice chatting. Bye bye.
Bye.